Everybody, it is on and popping. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Excited to have you all here. We got a few more who are trickling in. If you're just coming in, just in the chat window, go ahead and let us know where you're tuning in from. And also, I'd be curious to know if you could let us know in the chat, what's your your curiosity, your lead curiosity today? Are you, do you have something you're interested in patenting? Are you just curious about like an idea in the future? Or do you just generally like learning and that's why you're here? Let us know kind of what's your reason for being here today. And then make sure you as well in your chat window, you'll notice that the default setting is it's telling you to send a message to only the panelists. It's a blue little box right above where you chat. Click that drop down and set it to panelists and attendees. So that way everyone here can see your message. Otherwise, it just goes to Bao and I. So just make sure that your chat function there is set to panelists and attendees. And just kind of quick housekeeping for today. Use the chat window for conversation. And if you have specific questions that you'd like Bao to answer, you're going to go over to the Q&A button and then you'll ask it as a question there. And we'll be kind of pretty open format with this. So ask questions as they come up for you and we'll be sure to find the right point to answer them. So with that, I just want to welcome everyone today to this special workshop that we're doing for the Startup Hype Man audience. And that is, we're welcoming Bao Tran here from patentoffice.io to talk to us about the patent system and how, I mean, it was weird because I'll just kind of give everyone a background. Like Bao and I think met a couple months ago. I want to say maybe you were just like on my email list, Bao.
Yes.
And so yeah, you were on my email list and you had replied to an email I wrote, and then we got to talking, and then you were mentioning some interesting stuff about patenting that I just like had never considered before, especially in the context of like how it can actually help a startup grow, which I didn't think about that. You know, aside from the idea of like, oh, if you have a patent, you know, an investor might think it's more valuable, but there's even more built into that than just this idea of an investor may think it's more valuable. So I'm really excited to have you teach our audience today on all this stuff. And it looks like in the chat window already, people are saying, you know, I've got a possible idea for a design or utility patent here to learn. Someone else is saying they want to understand the patent system and process overall. So with that, Bao, I'll let you take it away on the screen share and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks, Rajiv. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here to talk about IP and your startups. So, you know, in the old days, companies were manufacturing heavy. So most of your assets were property and plant equipment. In the accounting world, they call it PPE. But, you know, over time, you know, from the 60s all the way to the present, the value of companies shift increasingly to the intangible. So for example, you know, McDonald's, you know, when you think of McDonald's, you really, you know, the branding is so huge. You know, that the fact that they have, you know, cooking equipment and, you know, grills and things like that, they're nice to have, but really, you know, to me, the main value of McDonald's is in the brand. When you think of a hamburger, you think of, you know, McDonald's or Burger King, and pretty much that's it. The top 2 or 3, and the rest of it rolls down. So IP is playing an increasingly significant role. Let me make sure I am sharing my slide. Let's see. Are you guys seeing my slides, Rajiv?
Nope.
Let me see. I wonder what happened to the
Go ahead and hit the share screen button again.
Let's see. I'm trying to let's see. Nope, that's the wrong button. Oh, there it is. Okay, the share screen. Now I see it. Got it. It was hidden away. So let me start the slideshow and share the screen. All right, so a nice black background. And let me just dive straight in and go to the next slide. So what is IP? IP is traditionally 4 bundles of rights: patents, copyrights, trademarks, and trade secrets. So of these, patents are the most valuable. Drug companies, you know, if you think of it like a patent lasts for 20 years, and typically for a drug company, every year of life is worth billions. And in fact, even this month, patents and the COVID made it into the big news, right? The White House intervened now to temporarily suspend patent rights to COVID treatment. And that in itself is a controversy. I mean, on one hand, you got humanitarian concerns. On the other hand, you got the rights of the companies that have invested into this. So that's an example of patents in the news. Copyrights. Typically that is for music, for videos. Netflix, they play copyrighted movies, and so that's typically a domain of copyright. And more recently, you've heard of the rise of non-fungible tokens. It's a type of cryptocurrency that takes an artwork and split it out into small, in effect, licenses to the owners. But the difference is that the cryptocurrencies now provide proof that you own a fraction of the authentic original copy. So that's an example of copyright in the news. Trademarks, I've just talked about McDonald's and Burger King. I mean, you got all sorts of famous trademarks out there that you should be familiar with. Nike's an example. So we all have seen trademarks. So trade secret, those are the things that you keep, as the name implies, secrets. So, an example of a famous trade secret would be the Coca-Cola formula. That's been a secret for over 100 years, and no one's been able to crack it. I mean, even Pepsi spending a lot of money, they couldn't, they couldn't quite replicate the exact taste of a Coca-Cola drink, and that's due to trade secrets. So here it is, patents. It's basically, it's a contract between the government and the inventor that in exchange for teaching the rest of the world how to operate and use your invention, you get exclusivity for 20 years. So I used to be a lawyer with a big law firm, and I when there was a startup that made the Invisalign system, if you guys have gone to a dentist, you'll see Invisalign, the clear brace that moves teeth. I filed all the original patents for that, and that was in 2001 timeframe. The company went public in 2001, and now the patents expires. And so you see a lot of Invisalign copy clones that are out there. And so that shows you the effect of the 20-year exclusivity. Invisalign had a 20-year run, and so now the shares was originally at $30, and now they're at $800. So copyright, again, I think we've talked about this. This is typically used for literary, like a book, a music score, the musical play itself, or movie, for example. So trademark, we've talked about that. McDonald's, Burger King, Nike, and then trade secret is the copyright formula. The secret formula for Coke drinks. So patents, it started a long time ago in Greece, 500 BC. So it's been around. In Europe, it started in the British king started granting out exclusivity to certain inventors, and then but the early systems were really geared toward the elite. So in the U.S., when the Constitution was written, the founders recognized the importance of patent system, and they want to use a patent system to stimulate entrepreneurial energy by giving the inventors an incentive to work on new ideas. And so that was the basis for the patent system. So there's a theory of, okay, it's a bargain between the government and the inventor. In exchange for exclusivity, you're going to teach the world how your invention operates so that knowledge is disseminated. And that system has worked out well for us. I mean, we've been the dominant economic engine of the world for almost 2 centuries. So stimulate invention and sharing knowledge. That's the goal of the patent system. And in exchange for doing that, you get 20 years of exclusivity when you've used the patent system. So basically, relatively, it's a written document that describes your invention. It discloses your technology. You pay a relatively low fee, and I guess low is relative. It's still in the order of, almost $1,000 for a small entity for filing it. Once you file it, then the applications get examined by the patent office. And, you should expect some pushback from them. They're going to challenge you on obviousness. They're going to say, oh, your invention is obvious because of, 2 different prior patents, for example. So in the old days, you used to have to bring a prototype to the patent office, but now that's been removed. And so you can see that our economic, the patent system has, correlated well with our economic growth. It's increased. It's been increasing. In the old days, in the 18th century, it was 20,000, and now it's over 500,000 patents filed a year. So, what can you patent? So, the Constitution grants patents for a machine, a method of manufacturing, or a process, or a composition of matter. So if you have those 3 things, you can file for a patent, subject to the fact that it has to be novel and non-obvious, and it has a use somewhere. So let's say, for example, a musical score wouldn't fit this category, so that would go over into the copyright. And so in general, the patent protects machines or software or a product. Let's say you came up with a novel soap. You can, or in the case of drugs, it's the same thing, right? It's a composition of chemical compounds. So those are protectable under patent law. So novelty we discussed. So basically, you can't just take, let's say, a car that's invented and then you add in, let's say, you make the car, instead of a color white, you make it color blue. That's kind of, it's an obvious variation of that. Or and then the utility has to be function as intended. So in general, utility is viewed very broadly. The only time when they attack you on utility is when you claim an invention that couldn't possibly operate. Like, for example, a perpetual motion machine, a machine that just runs without energy. So non-obviousness and novelty are kind of interrelated. And the question of what is obviousness is a major question that the patent office will push back on you. Let's say there's always this balance between, an invention by definition has to be a combination of previously known part to achieve a novel function, right? And so the balance is, well, if you're just combining old part, how can you be, is that obvious just to throw a bunch of parts together? And so when we get to that point, we have to argue, well, yeah, but you're combining this part and this part together, it achieves something that's never done before, or it improves performance in a significant way that you couldn't conceive of. So that's the way you would push back against the obviousness function, the rejection rather.
Hey, Bao, can I hop in with a question on that?
Oh, sure.
So utility, and I'm literally basing this off of so many times when I'm watching Shark Tank, you'll see, they'll ask, do you have a patent? And the entrepreneur will say, yeah, we have a utility patent. So is utility a specific classification of patent, and it's different than having another type of patent?
Yes. So there are 3 major types of patents. There's the utility, which normally is covering like a mechanical device or a drug composition or a software method. That's utility. There is a type called a design patent, and a design patent is to cover, let's say, ornamental features of it. So for example, if you've seen a Coke bottle that has the ridges between the perimeter of it, the ridges and the way that Coke bottle look, the bottle itself is, from a use function, it's not novel. Bottle's been around, but when you have those unique shape, those ornamental features, as they call it, then that could be patented as a design patent. But it's going to be the design patent is easy to get, but the problem with that is because it covers a design, somebody can change the design and then, and make a completely different design, even though it's the same bottle. Well, even if it's just a bottle, but if they make it into a different look and feel, then they don't infringe the design patent. So that's the design. There is also a plant patent that covers, let's say if you're in the cannabis business and you come up with a new species of plant, you can protect it under the plant patent variety. So all of those cumulatively is in one group. There is one more patent I want to discuss, which is called a provisional. A provisional is a placeholder, and that thing lasts for only 1 year. And so, a lot of time when people talk about a utility, they're thinking of utility versus provisional, because a provisional is a placeholder that's very inexpensive to file, and they'll give you patent pending protection for 1 year. But in the end, you need to convert it to a utility. So you'll hear that term a lot, utility versus provisional. A provisional is a placeholder. Think of a provisional as like in the stock market, an option to acquire something, and that option expires in 1 year. So those are the major. That's kind of like a major breakdown of different types of patents. I hope it's not confusing.
No, that was super helpful. Thanks. And also in our chat, Sheldon said provisional is what he's most interested in.
Yeah. Provisional is very inexpensive because you can write it yourself. There's no formality requirement. You can literally take your slide deck, your presentation deck, and stick them in as a provisional application. That can work. However, we don't recommend it. Well, from a strict legal perspective, the more care you put into the application, the better. Because think of it this way: if all you did was to write your invention on the back of a napkin, and then file that as a provisional, in 1 year we convert that into a utility application, and the utility is typically 20 to 30 pages in length, and that's why it's expensive to do. And so the question is, if you file just the back of a napkin as a provisional, and then later on it came to be 20 pages of text, that people are going to say, well, did you really possess the invention with the back of the napkin description? So the ideal way to do it is to do a full description, and you file it as a provisional, and then you convert it into a utility. Now, drug companies do that routinely, and there's a good reason why they do it that way. For a drug company, the life of a patent every year is worth a few $1 billion. And sorry about that. And so when you use a provisional, you file them, and then in 1 year you convert it into a utility, and the life of the utility is counted from the filing date. It's 20 years from the filing date. So in effect, if you do it using the provisional and utility combination, you got 21 years of life. So from a legal perspective, that is the best way to do a provisional. But most people, they rely on the provisional as a low cost, inexpensive way of documenting your invention, without a whole lot of support. And that certainly is a good way of using provisionals. But from a theoretical perspective, the best way to do a provisional is to pack in as much information as you can into it, and then you can pull that information out when you convert it into a utility, and then you get your full 20 years of life from the utility. So that's kind of perhaps too much details for you to know, but that's the one reason why drug company use provisional is for life extension, not to save money. But for most inventors, they think of provisional as an inexpensive way to tap into to get patent pending, and that certainly is a good reason for doing provisional. So, all right, let us go on to next. So the products. Here's examples of products that are patentable as a utility: composition, a product, or a mechanical device, or software even. Processes. So software is typically patented as a method or a process. So, you would take your flow chart that describe how your software operates, and you would then convert those into steps, very much like a recipe, a cooking recipe. here's how to make a hamburger. Step number one, you form a patty. Step number two, you grill it. Step number three, you flip it. Step number four, you warm up the bun. Step number five, you put the buns and the meat together. Step number six, you put in lettuce and things like that. So that's an example of a process. So think of it like a recipe, a cooking recipe. And typically software is protected that way. So yeah, here's the issue of not obviousness. So if you have a camera, combine a phone into a camera, is that obvious? Well, the counter argument, and so the examiners will be making this point. They'll say, well, camera's been around for hundreds of years. Phone's been around for at least 20 years. Here you are, you're just combining a camera, a CCD sensor into a phone, and voila, you got a phone camera. So what's so novel about that? So the argument we on the other side of it would push back on is, well, the structurally they're different, they're much smaller. You can't take the a camera and squeeze it into a phone and come up with the same form factor. It's smaller, lower power, enables you higher convenience. So we would try to make the argument that it's not obvious, and you can't just take a single lens reflex and squeeze it into a phone. So the argument of combining a camera and a phone together being obvious, we would push back like that. So that's an example of the examiner making a point, this thing is obvious, and we as lawyer on the other side will push back as to why it's not obvious. So we talk about plant and design patent already. The plant, as long as you have some distinctiveness in the way you splice it or you grow it, then you would capture that. You would describe the characteristics of the plant in a plant patent. A design patent, the most famous design patent is the iPhone design patent, right? Where the phone has a little curve on the edges. That's the famous Steve Jobs affinity for curves on a rectangle subject, right? And that was actually the fundamental point of litigation between Apple and Samsung, was whether or not the Samsung phone with the curvature at the edge actually infringes the Apple design patent. And so that's it's a big example of the power of design patent. Even simple things like that, it can be worth a few billion in litigation. But you got to remember, they spent a lot of money fighting on this point. So, but it's very interesting that a phone with rounded with curved edges, could be granted a design patent. So the process for applying for a patent, you go through the utility, design a plant, and then the filing status determines the fee you pay. So if you employ 500 or more, you're considered employees, you're considered a large entity, and you pay full fee. If you are less than 500 people in your company, and they're talking about like extended, everybody combined together. If you have a subsidiaries, they count those as well. But if you have a totality of less than 500 people affiliated in your organization, you get half discount, 50% discount on the government filing fee. Now, if you earn an individual, if you're an individual and you earn less than, I think it's around 180,000 a year, you can qualify for the micro entity, which takes the full rate and divide it by 4. So it's 25% of the full rate that a large entity would pay. So that's where, a lot of, if you're an individual, a lot of people want to consider micro entity to save money. But typically, most of the people that we deal with, they go into a small entity status. And then here is the provisional and non-provisional that I think Rajiv just discussed. And then the enforcement aspect of that is litigation. And I think for a startup viewpoint, litigation is really the last resort. You get a patent not expecting to sue other people, but of course, if somebody is trying to kill you by copying you, then you will resort to litigation to enforce your right. From a startup perspective, I think most people don't think about litigation. They think of, okay, I'm going to use the patent application number one to deal with investors who will not sign an NDA. So most venture people I know of will not sign an NDA. So that's one good reason to do a patent application. Number two is it gives you a halo of, state-of-the-art technology. So you can mark on your website patent pending, and that gives you a halo of being tech savvy. And point number three is investors, when they look at your patent, if you have a utility, they typically, you can use that to argue that that's an asset, a tangible asset that should be a part of the company valuation. And so institutional investors typically say, hey, we'll give you $100,000, $200,000 worth of value per patent filing, because it is an asset. I mean, you can't just say, well, a patent is no value. So you can use that as a basis to increase your company valuation at a minimum between, around $200,000 increase in valuation. And, if you have a patent that's enforced and valid, it can be worth in the billions. So it ranges between 200,000 all the way up to the sky. And so those are advantages of filing patent, even if you don't think you're going to sue somebody, because most people don't enter don't create a business of thinking about suing. So, but that is your right when you get a patent. So here are the various ways you can demand that people who copy to stop it and pay you damage for the past infringement. You can license it for royalty, typically 5 to 10% of the profit. Or you can just, if you don't have the budget for litigation, then you can just ignore them for a few years, or 1 or 2 years. If you go too long, they're going to think, the courts are going to say, well, you kind of sat on your right, so you don't have any more right if you sat on it for too long. So, I think 2 to 5 year maximum. Yeah. So anyway, those are the options you have. Litigation versus licensing, we've kind of gone over that, so I'm going to skip. And again, this is the factors in litigation, but I think for startup, most of you don't, you're in it to do a business, right? So, but this is a process for litigation. And then this is the last slide I have. I mean, basically IP is about, I think this is about a couple of years old. So by now I suspect it's about 40% of GDP. But from the market value perspective, it's easily 80% of the big stock market, the Fortune 500 stock market valuations is based on the branding. It's not based on the plant and equipment anymore. It's really, the value of Nike as a brand. It's not so much their equipment, manufacturing equipment. And that's basically the end of my slide, and I can switch over to a demo of a new technology that we've been working on that applies artificial intelligence to help you organize your thoughts to do a patent application. But I can do that. But Rajiv, you want to kind of take a break and ask and deal with questions now, or do you want to go ahead and go into the demo?
Yeah, let's do a quick break here of not a break, but let's take any questions if people have them. So if you have questions, use the Q&A tab and just type them in there and be sure to get to them. A couple of things that I'm curious about. Can you talk through how does this patent process or this patent system ultimately impact a company's valuation?
Oh, massive. Well, yeah, massively. I mean, to be, in the old days, a manufacturing company, the bulk of the value is in the manufacturing equipment technology, right? But as we all come to realize that the equipment's after depreciation and all of that, it's certainly not something that you would ignore in the value. But, if you look at it this way, Apple has no manufacturing equipment. They completely outsource it, right? So to them, that tells you that the value to Apple is not in the manufacturing equipment. What do they have? They have a bunch of engineers working all over the world, mainly in California, but they create new products, new designs. They don't have a single, they completely outsource it to China for manufacturing. And so what does Apple actually have? I mean, in that scenario, I would argue that Apple is probably 99% IP, right? Take another example. I mean, let's do something more, manufacturing oriented. I mean, if you look at the car companies, let's say a Ford or the GM, I mean, they have huge manufacturing facilities, but where are they in the valuation context in the stock market? Then they're not valued very highly. I mean, it's sad that Tesla, a company that's 4 or 5 years old, they outpace them for within 5 years in the value. And so Tesla is all IP. They don't, it's all about how you design the sorry, my gardener just came in, so it's a little loud in the background. So I think that it's all IP in the modern world. Certainly, if you look at the software company like Adobe, it's all IP. There's nothing about manufacturing. So to me, in my view, it's all, the world is moving to be pure IP, and the challenge is how do you capture that IP, even though under COVID you have a kind of a distributed work arrangement, right? You got employees that are everywhere. How do you control that? How do you prevent one of your employees from taking your idea and jumping to the next company? In fact, that happened. That happened with Uber. That was the CTO of Uber took a hard drive full of designs. It was at Uber. No, it was.
I think it was, you're talking about a self-driving car, right?
Yeah, I forgot. I think it was actually a Google company. It was a
yeah.
Google spinoff. He took a whole hard drive full of design and started his own company. And Google went after him using a combination of trade secrets and patents. So, to me, that's a bigger challenge, is how do you prevent your employees from migrating with your idea in the new environment where you're really, you have mobile employees that are mobile, either that or you have a global manufacturing, chain. And, but anyway, so
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
We've got a question from Ashok. He's asking, is a patent valid globally, or do you need a patent for each country you operate in?
I'm sorry, repeat that again.
Is a patent valid globally, or should you get a patent for each country you operate in?
You got to do it in each country because the patent is an instrument of the local law. So in the U.S., a U.S. patent would be enforced by U.S. courts. You couldn't take that patent and go over to Europe or China. So you gotta file globally. For a startup, I don't recommend that. I think you need to focus on your key market and where you plan on going. I remember when I was associate general counsel for Invisalign, the founder wanted just to go everywhere. That's like, and we calculated back in the year 2000, that was $250,000 of filing fee if you go global everywhere. And I kind of pushed back on him. I said, well, come on. I mean, you foresee Invisalign operating in Africa. And well, I guess, I don't have quite the same vision as he did, but eventually it did come out in Africa.
Yeah, it ended up going global.
Yeah, but for most companies, that's not going to happen, right? So what you want to do is you want to control your costs and you want to focus on where you practically are. So practically, it's going to be Europe, I think, is a big market. China, for sure. Australia, and Korea, maybe. So those are the major countries that I would consider. There are ways to defer your cost of going global by up to 3 years from the very first filing date. So that's called a PCT, Patent Cooperation Treaty. And if you use that approach, again, think of it like an option. Think of it like very similar to a provisional, except now it's 3 years and it's global. So for roughly $6,000-7,000 fees you pay, you extend your option to go global 3 years from the first filing date. So it delays that cost of going overseas. Most of the entrepreneurs I work with, they pick that route because they kick it down the road. They figure, well, we either gonna go big with a Series B or Series C, and we get $100 million in. All this won't be, it'll be a rounding error, or they're gonna get acquired by a bigger company. So they typically buy the PCT option route versus directly jumping in immediately and go everywhere, because that's very expensive.
We've got a question from Ken Woods, and he's asking, and Ashok, thank you for the question. And if you have any follow-up on that, just go ahead and add it into the Q&A. We've got a question from Ken who's asking, he said, I find that most ideas have been patented in some way. If you find that someone already has a utility or design patent on an idea that you like, how do you recommend talking to that entity about licensing?
Very carefully, because now if you talk to them, you're exposing, that you're interested, right? And that means they're going to be looking for you. So I would recommend in that case, use an intermediary. And that way, like a law firm, or maybe somebody that, I think a law firm is the best, because then there's attorney-client privilege, and we will never, we can't be forced to disclose who asked us. But if you ask your wife to call or something like that, there is no privilege. And in case they depose her, they eventually find out who is a person that's interested in this patent. So in that scenario, it's good to get a lawyer who then makes an anonymous inquiry, says, hey, I have a client that's interested in your technology. What are your terms? And if you don't like the terms, you can just walk and nobody would ever know. So I would be very careful. But, having said that, if I'm a patent owner and somebody comes and approach me voluntarily to license my technology, I would want to work with them and get some money rather than none. So I think that's good, but be careful. Initially, protect yourself.
Thank you. We have a question from Sheldon. He has a two-part question, or actually, I guess it's two separate questions. His first question, I guess, would be a quick answer: is what is a ballpark cost on a provisional patent?
Provisional can be done fairly inexpensively. In our firm, we charge $495. And we'll I guess I will show you how it works. You can even do it yourself if you want. Like I said, you can literally take your slide deck and put it into a provisional application and file it and mail it into the patent office. The downside of that is that if you don't have sufficient disclosure, if that particular IP becomes valuable downstream, and you have to go back and say, well, I was in complete possession of that concept. And if you put in a 2 or 3 page slide deck, you didn't fully describe how it operates, then they're going to say, well, that particular 2 pages didn't really disclose what ultimately became the patent. Because a typical patent, if you've ever done a look for one of them, they're very in depth. So my recommendation is, when you do a provisional, if you do it by yourself, squeeze every bit of information into it. The more information, the better.
As you were answering there, he had a follow-up where he said, but do you need to search for it before you, and actually this is also part of Ashok has another question. So do you need to search for the idea first to check if there is a patent owner before proceeding with an idea?
No, a provisional, there's no requirement of that. Now, when you do a utility, yes. But let me tell you from my 20 years of experience, I rarely find I would flip around the question around a different way. And my approach is, I have to admit, is different than the classroom approach. Okay. So let's say you have 2 people, one in Russia, and you are working on solving the same problem, right? And let's say you describe your solution in a 1 or 2 page, okay? Now, because you describe the problem you're solving and your solution in such a high level, the odds are very, very high that what you're working on is going to overlap to what the guy in Russia is working on, right? Now, if you do your application the way that I'm advocating, put in all the details you have, what's the odd that 2 people working on the same problem is going to come up with identically the same solution? It's very, very low. So instead of spending the $800 on a prior art search, and even if you did that, there's no guarantee that the prior art search is foolproof, because it was only going to be in the US and only on the applications that are available for search. So there's all sorts of uncertainty when you do a patent search, because it's just a budgetary issue. In litigations, they spend literally $100,000 on a patent search because they're trying to kill something that's going to be worth $1 billion. So you will never spend that much money in a search, in a litigation. So in a prior art search, you can only do a sanity check, right? So in my view, you're better off just using Google Patents or whatever to do and do or go to the patent office and do a sanity check, and then focus on your own invention, because the odds are very low that if you have you put in the application 20 or 30 pages of text and lots of 10 pages of drawing illustrating how your invention operate, the odds are in somebody somewhere in the world, they're not going to solve the problem exactly the way you're doing it. They're going to have, at the very top level, yes, you both are solving the same problem, so therefore you both are going to have very similar description. But when you go down to your specific approach, then that's the differentiation. And that's why we value details, depth of your disclosure.
I'm going to jump over to Tracy's question, and then Sheldon, I'll get to your other question you have. I want to make sure we're getting to everybody. Tracy asked, what are options for protecting IP that is owned by a company that is dissolving?
Well, if it's dissolving, what you want to do is you need to have an agreement with the shareholder to reassign the ownership to, let's say whoever who's interested in that, right? Because once the company dissolves, you need a way of distributing the assets in the company. So, I'm sure the company would have some computers, some furniture, and IP would be an asset, no different than that. So if you are interested in the IP specifically, you would then approach the board of directors and say, hey, I offer X dollars to buy this IP out. So normally that's the way you resolve it, is by an internal agreement that the company that's dying sell you the IP right.
Okay. Yeah. It's the way I would relate to that is it wasn't necessarily like IP, but my first company. So the podcast that I do now started out of my first company. And when my co-founder and I shut that down, I wanted to continue doing the podcast and have the archive of episodes. I didn't want to start a new show. I wanted to retain the archive. And so right. I had to buy him out,
right,
and purchase ownership of the show coming out of that. Not that we had it like patented or anything, but that was IP we had created together.
It's IP. It's right. A type of asset. And so you would resolve it no different than you resolve, how do you deal with, let's say, the company car or a company furniture?
Yeah. These are really good questions, everyone. They keep coming in too.
Yeah, that was a great question.
So we have the other question Sheldon had was, if there's more than, like, if you as a company have more than one patentable process, should you do a patent for each? And then he says, for example, you have a software app and a unique process used by a manufacturer to index and advertise their products versus the app and the process used by the customer to view and purchase the products.
Yeah. Because the patent office will force you to subdivide out. You can bundle everything into one big one, but when you but eventually, basically, the patent office is, you pay for one examination, you're going to get examination in one particular product. So naturally, you want to subdivide out. There are occasions where I've kind of pushed everything into one big guppy application document. But in the end, eventually, you're going to subdivide them out, just because, the patent office for one fee will examine only one invention. So, and also from an IP perspective, you're better off to have them, inventions that aren't related in their own little bucket. Of course, you got to balance that against the cost, right? And so there's a natural issue of, well, can I squeeze in 100 inventions into one case and file them as one filing fee and get all of that? So the short answer to that is, you can squeeze 100 inventions into one case and pay only one filing fee, but the examiner will only review one out of the 100, number one. So what happened is that in that scenario is, after you get that one allowed, you swing around and you file what is called a continuation. And then you go after claim number 2, and then you go after the invention number 3. You can do it in serial. So that's the one case where, if you have limited budget, you would squeeze everything into one document and then serially pull them out. But you're trading off time to patent.
Okay. We have another one. Ashok wants to know, what if you built your software using open source, can you still patent the product?
Yes, because as long as you have novel, so the patent system isn't, worried about whether or not it's open source or not. To them, open source is prior art, no different than another competitor's product, right? So it's prior art is prior art. So in the application, you want to focus on what have you done on top of the open source. Now, you got to be careful because open source, they have language in their license agreement. Certain very restrictive open source type says that if you embed our open source into your software and you sell it, you're obligated to disclose, provide all your source code along with as a distributable. So, you want to be careful relying on that. That's why a lot of companies, they're very worried about that. And I think there's a prime example is Linksys. Linksys acquired another company. I forgot what it was, but they had a router, and the router uses the Linux OS inside of it. And then they threw in a bunch of other routing software on top of that. And they sold all that as part of the router that Linksys acquired. And then once they acquired it, Linksys magically pulled back all the source code. And then people found out about it. And then, there was a brouhaha, and then Linksys eventually sub-released it back out. So be careful with source code, open source, because of that risk.
Let's maybe we can spend a couple of minutes, because what I want everyone to see, this is pretty cool. What they've been working on, what Bao's team has been working on at Patent.io is a software that actually makes the whole, essentially getting all the ideas out of your head and into a patent filing really easy. So I want to just take a few minutes, Bao, if you could maybe walk everyone through that so they can see
right
how I think it actually makes answering a lot of these questions on their side a lot easier as well as they think about what they want to protect.
Sure. So I'm here. I'm looking at the screen where the login as patent office, and I'm going to pull up an edit of a sample case. So in this case, it's basically an example. It's a gaming pod where you got, let's say, GPUs and VR inside of a pod that you can place them in an airport, for example. So here, naturally that question of provisional and non-provisional. So you see mainly the difference between a provisional and a non-provisional is in the claims. The claim is a legally is the main thing that the patent office will look at. So an example of a claim is, let's say if you are the first person to invent the car, I might claim a car as, okay, it has a frame, it has an engine mounted on the frame, and it has a bunch of wheels that are driven by the engine. That is a schematic illustration of a car. And so that would be a claim for a car. Had I invented, was I the first guy, to invent the car, right? But going back to here, so typically the format of a patent is it has a background and it has a summary. Okay, so most inventors don't have any problem with putting in a few paragraphs that says, oh, the problem I'm solving is this. And so that is the background. Okay, so for this case, I'm saying the background for this is, oh, people are bored in an airport. Okay, so that's the background. And they need something to do to be entertained. That's the background. Then the invention. In a summary, I'll say, oh, the game system, the major elements of my gaming system is an enclosure. You got displays in the walls of the enclosure. You got a computer with graphical processing units to run 3D. You got a way to receive payment. You got a seat, and then you have some sort of a storage for your luggage in the airport. So those are the high-level elements of my hypothetical invention, right? Similar to the way that I just claim a car. So most people can describe the high-level view of their invention in this. So in my experience in working with inventors, if you ask them, oh, enter something about why you developed this, they won't have any problem writing the background. They won't have any problem writing what's important, what they think is novel about their idea. So they won't have any problem doing this. The problem where they have is in how do you come up with this text, massive amount of text that's going to be like 10, 15 pages, right? And so what we do is we apply the latest of AI technology and into this process. Well, what we do is you say, well, why don't you upload an image that reflects your invention? So in this case, the image is of a game. I'm just trying to see if I can close this window here, but I can't. But for some reason, let me just jump back out and go back in. Okay, so let's go back here. It's automatically pulling this thing out. Okay, there it is. That's how I do it. Software is so complicated, I even forgot how I could open and close windows. So anyway, you'll see here that I uploaded an image of a movable, mobile cubicle where you can sit in. You can have your luggage here in number 1. There's a seat here. You sit on it, you type on it, and then there's a window where you can view the outside, and then there's going to be virtual reality screens around you where you can play games inside of an airport. So, that's an example, right? And then you annotate it. So let's say 100 is the GPU, a game computer with GPU. 200 is a GPU, 100 is a computer. And then 202 is cooling for it. And then number 204 is some sort of a haptic chair for gaming, right? So with those high-level description or part list of the drawing, you can click on this button called auto text. And when you do that, basically the computer is now generating text that expanding from your thought. So think of this like, Steve Jobs says a computer is a bicycle for the mind. Our system is, think of it as a bicycle for your patent text generation, because it takes your it takes your high-level description of each of these parts, and it'll suggest some text for you. And the text may be appropriate, may not. If you don't like this, you click on this and regenerate. Okay. And after 1 or 2 trials, if some of these iterations, there is the textual description you don't like, you can just copy it and then edit them as you design. Now it looks much deeper now, right? So this is the latest in what is called AI technology, automated text generation. And the text is generated based on your background and based on the summary of the invention that you typed in. What you think you came up with, right? And then each of these element drawing, is expanded based on that text. Yeah, it uses those seed texts that you've generated. And then, if you like it, then you can just insert it into our system. So I'm not going to mess it up because let's say here. And then once you've done that, you notice here that you have certain things like where it highlights in red for you, like it says here, hi. And so we're catching various fuzz word that maybe are more, comparative words that may not have meaning. So for example, if you say, I have a fast computer, what is fast meaning? So it'll challenge you on that. It's like, well, what do you mean by fast? Or here, a small suitcase. Well, what do you mean small? So we catch various phrases that are kind of fuzzy and try to force you to be more precise about them. And high, low, things like that. So by using this system, it helps you expand. It's like a bicycle for your mind, and it expands your description, right? And then once you've added more figure, you can add more figure if you want. But for in the shortage of time that we have, I'll go to the next feature. And then what we do is then each patent will have certain amount of boilerplate at certain spots. You can select these boilerplate, or you can write your own. Okay. So for example, at the very end, you might have a boilerplate that says, while there has been shown several and alternate embodiments of the invention, it is to be understood that changes would be known to one skill in the art without departing from the underlying scope of the invention. And so, while we basically, it says is while we show you one implementation, we don't want to be limited to that implementation. That's basically what this boilerplate thing. You can use another one like this, or you can use whatever. So we have various, lawyer common boilerplate that you can use to make your document sound more professional. And then we have the claims. So for a utility application, what you do is you sketch out your claim, and the claim is the most difficult part of this. And so we don't, we really don't expect a non-lawyer to be able to write it, but we certainly encourage you to do that. Basically, a claim is the high-level sketch of your invention. Now, the problem is a lot of inventors think of the claim too narrowly or too broadly. And in general, my experience is that that's where an area where I need to come in and fix it for them. But we certainly can collect from you what you think is the essence of your invention, right? So, and you graphically sketch it out. And here,
let me hop in for a second because we're starting to run up against time here. And I think this is really cool software. And I want to make sure that people know how they can get in touch with you.
oh, okay.
Jump off. Can you just kind of maybe a 20-second wrap on the software and then let everyone know how they can
Sure.
if they're interested?
So the next neat part is called a diagnostic. We've done this for our internal patent application that we do, where we check the consistency of your part labeling. So if you have things that are inconsistent, then it'll catch it. So for example, 13, it saw that you reference a display 13. You also have a 3D game display 13. And we look at that and we say, yeah, I understand that's 13. That's not an error. But sometimes it may be a problem. Like for example, hinge 7 and hinge 6. You might want to go back and double check on that. So we have a diagnostic of your system where traditionally, this is in my old law firm, we have a paralegal that goes through and manually picks apart this part list and then try to make sure that there's not an incorrect reference. So we have this automated for you, and that's pretty much about it. So you can reach me at B Tran, boy T-R-A-N-G. I wish I have a slide that I can bring up the slide, but B Tran at patent. Here. Yeah, btran at patentoffice.io. So you can go to patentoffice.io and you can see, or you can just connect to us by patentoffice.io. Patentoffice.io. You can go to that site and just contact us. But basically, we basically saying that this is a smarter way to get the patent than the traditional approach of working. You basically dumping everything to the lawyer, and then the lawyer does everything. Think of it like we're the quicken version for your for patenting. In the old day, accountants, they collect a shoebox of receipt from you, they type it in themselves, and then they give you a report. And now Quicken basically collect all that information from your credit card. The accountant just massages the information and send you back. The result is improved speed, improved quality, because now you have diagnostics and a lower cost. And so overall, that's our approach. So that's that. So if we're short on time, I had, maybe if there's any other questions, I can certainly answer.
Yep, btran at patentoffice.io. If you got any follow-up questions, you can send. We'll also get an email out to everybody probably tomorrow with the recording from today. And then we'll include Bao's contact info there as well. So appreciate it, Bao. This was super helpful. I took a ton of notes, and I hope everyone who's on the call today got a chance to as well. And again, awesome questions, everybody. And hopefully we can do this again later in the year.
All right. Well, thanks, everybody. And thanks, Rajiv, for setting this up. It's fun.
All right. Have a great week, everybody.
Bye-bye.